The testimony before the Credentials Committee, the FDP had a lineup of very different people. They had Rita Schwerner, the widow of Mickey, who had been killed in Neshoba County. They had Martin Luther King. Everybody knew King.
The seating of the delegation from the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party has political and moral significance far beyond the borders of Mississippi or the halls of this convention.
But the highlight of the testimony was that of Fannie Lou Hamer. The sharecropper who had been evicted from her plantation had come to symbolize the Mississippi movement.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, it was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen.
The president, Lyndon Johnson, he's not afraid of Martin Luther King's testimony. He's afraid of Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony. And so he decides that the country should not see her testify live.
Johnson is in the White House, and he convened an impromptu press conference.
We will return to this scene in Atlantic City, but now we switch to the White House and NBC's Robert Goralski.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
On this day, 9 months ago.
He did it knowing that they would break away, thinking he might announce who his choice of vice president was going to be. Instead, he gets up there and he announces, get this, he announces that it's 9 months to the day since Governor Connolly, who was there, was shot along with President Kennedy. So he announced a 9-month anniversary. Everybody's scratching their heads.
Thank you very much.
And then he leaves. And by that time, Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony was over. However, it backfired on Johnson because it became a story that she had been taken off television, and in the news that night and for days afterwards, they replayed her testimony.
I was carried to the county jail and put in the booking room. They left some of the people in the booking room and began to place us in cells.
She had Mississippi in her bones. Martin Luther King or the SNCC field secretaries, they couldn't do what Fannie Lou Hamer did. They couldn't be a sharecropper and express what it meant, right? And that's what Fannie Lou Hamer did.
And it wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was a state highway patrol. He said, "We're going to make you wish you was dead."
Mississippi is still a very rough place. You know, people is not just walking up like they used to do in the past, walking out, you know, shooting a man down or getting maybe 200 or 300 people carrying you out and lynching you, but it's in a more settled way. You know, they can let you starve to death, not give you jobs. These are some of the things that's happening right now in Mississippi. See, Mississippi is not actually Mississippi's problem. Mississippi is America's problem. Because if America wanted to do something about what has been going on in Mississippi, it could have stopped by now. It wouldn't have been in the past few years, between 40 and 50 churches bombed and burned. You see, and this lead me to say, you know, all of the burning and bombing that was done to us and the houses, nobody never said too much about that, and nothing was done. But let something be burned, you know, by a black man, and then, my God, you know, you see, the flag is drenched with our blood. Because, you see, so many of our ancestors was killed because we have never accepted slavery. We had to live on it, but we've never wanted it. So we know that this flag is drenched with our blood. So what the young people are saying now, give us a chance to be young men, respected as a man. As we know, this country was built on the black backs of black people across this country. And if we don't have it, you ain't gonna have it either, because we gonna tear it up. That's what they saying. And people ought to understand that. I don't see why they don't understand that. They know what they've done to us. All across this country, they know what they've done to us. This country is desperately sick, and man is on the critical list. I really don't know where we go from here.
Welcome once again to The Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York City. Fannie Lou Hamer was the youngest of 20 children born into a profoundly religious and deeply impoverished Black sharecropping Mississippi family, spending most of her early life from the age of 6 in the cotton fields. In the 1960s, she led voting drives and relief efforts with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and in 1964 co-founded and ran for Congress as a member of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Jailed, beaten by police, subjected to a hysterectomy by a white Mississippi doctor without her consent, driven from the plantation just for registering to vote, she became one of the fiercest and most formidable Black female activists of the 20th century. Yet she has remained largely unacknowledged in popular narratives of the civil rights movement. But our guest today on the show, the historian Keisha Blain, has sought to restore her to her proper place in history through her book, Until I'm Free. Hamer's life is contextualized within the larger struggle for equality and social justice. Each chapter identifies the work of a present-day activist and draws parallels to the battles that Hamer herself joined. Keisha is an award-winning historian and writer, an associate professor of history at the University of Pittsburgh, the president of the African American Intellectual History Society, and a columnist for MSNBC. Our other guest, Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove, is co-author with Reverend William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign, which he wrote with Reverend Barber, The Third Reconstruction. He also directs the School for Conversion, an education center in Durham, North Carolina. I've been blessed and honored to have him on a co-host for numerous shows. Fannie Lou passed on in 1977, but her enduring message is carried on in her memory, actions, and words. Nobody's free until everybody's free. Hate won't only destroy us, it will destroy these people that's hating as well. And I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Her message will endure because of Keisha's brilliant book and by Jonathan's activism and writings in the Poor People's Campaign and in his own committed Christian life that Fannie Lou Hamer exemplified. We're so grateful and honored to have them both on the show for a much needed discussion and dialogue. And thank you so very, very much, both of you, for being here. It's really wonderful.
Oh, thank you. This is a delight.
It is more than a delight. I don't know if there are words that go beyond delight. That's what this is. But there's so much to talk about. And can we begin with the 400 Souls Project, Keisha, that you were involved with Ibram Kendi? How is this a community project about the community? How did this get brought about?
Yes, well, thank you again for having me. I look forward to our conversation today. 400 Souls, as you pointed out, is a community history that really charts the rich and dynamic history of the Black experience in the United States from 1619 to 2019. In 2018, so just 1 year before the 400th year anniversary, Ibram reached out to me, and we've collaborated in several times before. But he reached out to me in 2018 to ask if I would be interested in collaborating yet again, but this time on a big project, one that would bring together 90 Black writers, including 10 poets, who would grapple with 400 years of the history. The idea was that it would be the kind of project that we certainly hope would be published in 2020, so right after the 400th anniversary of August 2019. As things worked out, the book ended up being published a bit later. But what is so great about it is that it allowed this crucial space for Black writers of various backgrounds. We brought together historians, we brought together journalists, I mentioned poets, theologians, just people from diverse backgrounds came together, and each person wrote about a particular theme or maybe a particular historical development or historical figure, and the writers grappled with 5 years of the history, and then the poets contributed amazing, I think, poems that linked the sections together. So it is a remarkable project, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
It was difficult to put together, but I am really proud of the work we did.
Oh, I love the scholarship, the artistry, like you're saying, the way it's woven together, and the telling of a story 5 years at a time. But just in the way that Jim was saying earlier, you did this history of Fannie Lou Hamer. That book takes history and weaves it right into the present, right? These themes that we've been struggling with, these themes that folks have really illuminated, how the Black-led freedom struggle contributes to them in every one of those chapters. It brings it into the present. It's a beautiful history. And if anybody's observing Black History Month as you're watching this, be sure you got a copy of 400 Souls. Yes, indeed.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we go back and forth to that historical period, and as Jonathan is pointing out, to the contemporary struggle. But we also want to touch on this incredible faith that Fannie Lou had, and the larger African American community, to withstand the incredible injustice and the brutality and the viciousness. And how do you weave that into your work as well?
So religion broadly, and faith, these are such important themes when you look at Black history, and we know this. I think perhaps most people know this in the context of the civil rights movement. We talk about individuals like Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. We talk about the work of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, mostly ministers. We talk about the way that Black churches provided spaces for activists to come together, to strategize, to plan, to support each other at the most difficult times. And so when I set out to write the book on Fannie Lou Hamer, I knew immediately that I could not overlook, and actually I needed to center her faith because it was central for her. As I talk about in that first chapter, it is so connected to Fannie Lou Hamer's political awakening. So at the moment that she learns, and she talks about the fact that she learns about her right to vote as a citizen of the United States in August 1962, that revelation takes place literally at a church, right? She's at a local church where activists have come together to hold a mass meeting to talk about voting rights. And at that meeting, she's able to connect her own faith with the broader struggle for political rights, or I should say human rights. And so faith is so vital to Fannie Lou Hamer's story. And it is also, I think, to the broader, the broader history when we look at certainly the U.S. context, when we look at various political and social movements, I would say it's nearly impossible to talk about political activism without grappling with faith. And I don't only mean Christian faith, right? I mean, I think about groups like the Nation of Islam. I think about just also playing a critical role in political and social movements. So faith expressed in different ways.
Absolutely. And she talked about it in terms of the power of public testimony, and saw herself as a practical theologian. Faith is Christian redemption. And as you pointed out too, Keisha, all of history is in a sense is politics. But you and Fannie Lou talk about the politics of love. And of course, Cornel West talks about radical love in the face of catastrophe. So Jonathan, you're the preacher here. I try to do my preaching too, but you're formally you live this as well. Well, you know what I'm saying here. So you relate to this as well, right?
I am a practicing Christian in the tradition that holds Fannie Lou Hamer as a saint, which is to say, she's an example, a shining example of what it means to follow Jesus in this world. And this is a beautiful rendering of her life. Yes, because it takes her faith seriously, and because remembering her life and reading it in light of the present, it illuminates how twisted so much of Christianity has become in public life. I mean, folks who just watch the news or just, listen to people who so-called, speak about biblical issues or moral issues would think that every Christian is some sort of narrow, right-wing person supporting the trucker protests up in Canada. But here comes Fannie Lou Hamer.
Yeah.
Got the Bible memorized, the verses she learned in Sunday school, probably the verses she had to quote at home in order to get her supper. And she's speaking directly to the social issues impacting her and other poor and marginalized people. It is a beautiful love. It's a radical love. And it's one that affirms her somebodyness, allows her to stand up, but never lets it be just about her. I mean, you read this story closely. Fannie Lou Hamer is always making connections, joining together with other people who are poor and marginalized, saying justice for us must be justice for all. And she's in that fusion politics, in that fight with the movement in Mississippi and with the broader movement for poor people's rights and human rights in her latter years.
Yeah. And you touch on something so profoundly important here. Again, it's realizing that we're all in this together, and the public testimony, in a sense, guards against as you point out, the distortion of Christianity, the misinformation that, of course, we have so much of today. But as you point out, Keisha, too, in your work, this is nothing new. I mean, they were trying to do all kinds of things to her message and the movement, particularly in the South, FBI and so on, back in the 50s and 60s.
Exactly. And as we were just talking, one of the things that came to mind for me, which is unfortunate, but it is true in connecting to the history of Christianity and sort of some of the complexities or even the distortions, is thinking about the Ku Klux Klan. Yeah. And the Ku Klux Klan will say that they're Christians, right? I mean, that's what's so unfortunate about it, is how individuals have taken, have distorted Christianity, presented it in a way that they have used, these ideas to bolster their racism and to justify white supremacy. So it is not coincidental then that the Fannie Lou Hamer spent so much time weaving in scriptures, that she spends so much time talking directly to preachers and about preachers, that she spent so much time talking about the sins of the nation and making it clear that the sins that she wanted to grapple with were the sins of racism, discrimination, white supremacy, right? And drawing these connections for people, because she understood how much others were distorting that message. And for her, it was very similar, I think. One could draw the parallels to abolitionists and thinking about the context, right, of slavery. Yeah. Similarly, right, how people would distort the word of God in order to justify all kinds of, inequities and inappropriate behavior. And Fannie Lou Hamer, so much like an abolitionist, was saying, actually, this is a message of liberation. This is a message of equality. This is a message of God's love for all humankind, and we need to come together, and we need to make sure that everyone has equal access and opportunity. That is the Christian message indeed. So I just think the Fannie Lou Hamer story helps us see all of these connections, and we see it in the long history sort of approach.
She has that prophetic fire inside of her that, you're absolutely right, dispels these myths, these lies, the KKK, Christianity, frankly, much of the more socially acceptable white Christianity that was going on in her day. But it's also there when she speaks to the preachers in her community, because there was a kind of quietism, folks who were willing to sort of talk about what Jesus means for the next life, and neglect the pressing issues of the day. And she spoke to those black preachers and said, no. If I read this Bible right, then Jesus came to set us free, and we got to be about that work in the present. That's prophetic in its own way.
Well, did she get some of that from her folks, right? Her family. Father was a firebrand Baptist preacher, correct?
Correct.
Yes. Household there, yeah.
Yes, and so I think, and I mentioned earlier how it's impossible to talk about Fannie Lou Hamer and not grapple with her faith, because at every moment of her life, when people ask me, well, how could Hamer keep pushing against the odds? How could she continue to organize even after there are attempts on her life? How could she stand up after the brutal Winona beating and decide that she will continue in this effort to expand Black political rights? And one of the answers that I give is her faith, and whether or not some people are willing to accept that, that is truly the answer, which is to say that she understood that her fight was bigger, right? That she answered to God. I mean, that she believed that it was divinely ordained, right? It's not just that she was interested in political movements. It's not just that she was interested in voting. She certainly had interest, but more to the point, she believed that God had actually placed her on this earth for a very specific purpose, and that was to help bring light, into a world of darkness, one that was certainly and is still very much shaped, by the legacies of slavery. And she had to keep going because she answered to a higher power. I mean, quite frankly, that's the way she saw it. She had to keep pushing, and she believed that because it was God's will, He would protect her, He would keep her, and He would see her through and make sure that the work that she was involved in would be successful, in fact. So faith is key at every step.
And kept her sane. She said that too. So master psychiatrist there too as well.
Well, that kind of witness does have a sort of universal reality to it. I mean, whatever your tradition, whatever your faith or lack thereof, you can't pay honest attention to Fannie Lou Hamer's life without asking, about the things that you're committed to, whatever they are. If you were jailed and beaten and lost your economic means of survival because of what you believe, what would keep you going? That's a question all of us have to ask. And she finds that in the faith that was passed on to her, and in the faith that she sang. That's the other part of it. She was a song leader, and it's such a crucial role in any movement to have people who can sing the things that the community holds on to in the midst of struggle. She did that and did it in a powerful way. She learned it in church, but she applied it in the streets and in the struggle.
Absolutely. just to turn a little bit to her political activism as well. Now, she was attracted to SNCC.
Mhm.
She was also involved in King's Poor People's Campaign, which of course Jonathan is intimately involved with as well.
Mhm.
So she would be very much at home, right, today with what Jonathan, Reverend William Barber, and so many others are involved in terms of the fusion movement, correct?
Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why, when I wrote the book, I speak a little bit about the Poor People's Campaign and one of the chapters because I've been thinking a lot about Fannie Lou Hamer's legacy, right? And just the way that her words, but also her example, just resonates to this day. And every time I talk to some, to Jonathan, when I hear Reverend Barber speak, when I hear Reverend Liz Theo Harris, I just immediately I think about Fannie Lou Hamer, and indeed, they are doing. The work that if Fannie Lou Hamer, if she were alive today, I think she would be at the front. I mean, she would be fully involved in the Poor People's Campaign today. Would be supporting, would be thrilled just to see the work that they're doing, the way that they continue to challenge, public officials and make people uncomfortable with, in saying, listen, we cannot ignore the poor, and it's just, I think, a testament to Fannie Lou Hamer's political vision, her commitment to improving the lives of everyone around her, and it goes back to her own experience, right? I mean, I think that is what's so interesting about this is that she grew up in poverty, she understood hunger, and she experienced it. And for her, the idea was, how do you go through all of that and make sure that you do something so that the next person doesn't have to endure what you have endured? She wanted to make things better for others. And SNCC, to the question you asked, SNCC provided the platform for her initially. As you know, she would go on to help establish the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, but it's initially the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee that brings her into the civil rights movement. I mentioned the mass meeting in August '62. It's that's where she's connecting with the SNCC activists, and she really loved all of these activists. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about some of the challenges, but she loved them dearly because she said that this was the first time that she encountered people who took her seriously. And I sometimes just pause, right? Just think about that. How she said that they took her seriously and it made a difference for her.
Yet, you mentioned the challenges. Well, should we jump in?
Yeah.
There were challenges. What are some of those challenges? Is she rejected the top-down models of the NAACP and even King's. So she was attracted to the grassroots organizing, the direct action. But what was her reaction when SNCC changed from a more integrationist leadership to a more fully Black nationalist orientation? You want to get into
and so she was very upset about it. I guess I'll take a step back and explain a couple of things. I think first and foremost, what was so appealing, there were several things that were appealing about SNCC for Fannie Lou Hamer, and one was the fact that it really emphasized the development of local leaders. As you pointed out, the NAACP, but also SCLC, which is the organization that King oversaw, and many, you can even draw parallels to Black churches and how they're structured, the hierarchy of these churches were, and in some cases today still are very much male dominated kind of spaces where certain people occupy the roles of leadership and others may help, others may support, but it's very clear who's in charge. Fannie Lou Hamer resisted that kind of model. She resisted the charismatic leader approach because she felt like it took away opportunities for ordinary folk to share their ideas, to be part of an effort to lead a movement. And so SNCC was powerful because it gave her the opportunity. I mean, she actually said it many times, there would be no Fannie Lou Hamer were it not for SNCC.
Hmm.
But what is interesting is that one of the other reasons she really loved SNCC is because it was, this interracial student-led organization. Fannie Lou Hamer would repeat it time and time again. She hated racism. She hated white supremacy. She did not hate white people. She loved all people, and she worked with all people, regardless of your socioeconomic background, regardless of your race. She would work with you and extend that love to you. So when SNCC decided to shift, around spring of '65 into a more, Black nationalist approach, Hamer was upset. I mean, she was upset because she felt like it really moved them in a direction that she saw as undermining the larger mission. She believed that having white people in the group who were committed to that work, that was vital. So she spoke out. She was very clear about her resistance, and many people didn't like it, and actually it caused enough friction that she moved, away from SNCC. But what's interesting is she continued to support. I mean, she was always positive, and that's one of the things that I love about Hamer. She could have certain differences, and even for King and others, she had her critiques, and she wasn't shy to criticize people, but she was also careful about not speaking in a way that she sort of deepened divisions. So even though she had differences with SNCC, when people would ask her about SNCC after she had already, parted ways, she would only speak positively about their work.
Mm. Mm. One time when Brother Bob Zellner was here in Durham, Bob was the first white member to join SNCC, and I'm pretty sure he was the last white member to leave at the end. But he came here to Durham and was visiting once, and I took him over to visit one of my mentors here in town, a woman named Ann Atwater, who was local civil rights leader, and they chatted for a while. At that point, she was quite sick. She was living in a nursing home, and I remember he leaned in after they had been talking for about 20 minutes. He said, "You sure do remind me of someone I used to know in Mississippi. Her name was Miss Fannie Lou Hamer." But that he had this memory, of her big love and her willingness to embrace, him, this white boy from Alabama who was in the movement, and yet, wanted to work even among white folks in Mississippi to try to help them to see that this, racial politics that they were being caught up in was not only hurting Black folks, it was hurting them, right? The folks who were the winners in the whole thing were really just a small group of very wealthy people, and poor white folks were stuck. And frankly, Fannie Lou Hamer devoted herself with the Head Start program and with food programs and other things, with really making sure that poor white kids got something to eat and got some access to education. It's a beautiful piece of her legacy.
Yeah, I want to get into that too. The Freedom Farm and the Freedom Farm Cooperative, the pig bank, but to go back a little bit to SNCC here, as she also became very much involved as an internationalist, correct, with some of the various freedom. Now, how about me and the audience understand the issue of Black nationalism, Black power, and still maintaining one's internationalism, where other nationalistic movements looked down upon, such as Zionism, perhaps? Or how is that all squared in the struggle? I'm particularly interested. I'm honored to have in mid-March, Charles Hamilton is going to be on, and who wrote Black Power with Stokely Carmichael. So these are
right.
Help me do some little homework here for that. But help us understand all of that.
Sure. And the short answer, I'll give the short answer and then a longer answer. The short answer is that it's complex and complicated, right? And so much so that my first book, before this one, is about Black nationalist women. And so I talk about Black nationalism and the connection to Black internationalism in the 20th century, And I chuckle about it because I felt like it was hard to explain so much. I really needed to write a book to get into the nuances of the history. What is so fascinating when it comes to Fannie Lou Hamer and how she fits into all of this, um, there are two things that I will emphasize. I think the first point is that Fannie Lou Hamer was not a black nationalist, right? And I make that clear. She was not a black nationalist. However, we can see the influence of black nationalist thought in many things that she advocated during her life. And the irony is, one of those examples is, in fact, Freedom Farm. So, what do I mean? I think when we talk about black nationalism, it's important to recognize that it's not monolithic, right? That black nationalism changes, shifts over time, and I would say over space too. We often think about Black nationalism through the lens of armed self defense or armed resistance. That is true, but that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is the emphasis on self determination, right? Economic self sufficiency. These are the core values that Fannie Lou Hamer advocated when she established Freedom Farm. She understood, even to the point of self-defense. I talk about in the book how her mother would carry, a gun when she went out into the field because she worried that, she might encounter someone might try to harm her and her children. She wanted to be ready, armed, right? And so you see the influence of armed self-defense. You see how it shapes Black life, right? So even when someone isn't necessarily a nationalist ideas are really, I think, shaping the way that people operate, the way they think. And so that's one point. So what is also interesting for Fannie Lou Hamer is when it came to the Black Power movement in particular, she did not necessarily agree, but she understood. And I mentioned how earlier how she was careful in her critiques of other activists, never to talk about things publicly that would deepen divisions. And that's how she dealt with the question of Black nationalism in the context of Black power. She would say that she was committed to nonviolence, nonviolent activism, but she did not denounce Stokely Carmichael, and she did not denounce others that spoke about the importance, of being armed, right, and the importance of being ready to protect oneself, because she believed that the question came down to how do we dismantle systems of oppression. Let's not criticize people who are oppressed trying to get out of their situation. Let's criticize the oppressor. And that was her point of view, which meant that even if she didn't agree, she was careful the way that she critiqued. So I hope that's helpful and to connect to the broader question of Black internationalism. As I talk about in the book, Fannie Lou Hamer at one point in her life, after she travels to Guinea in 1964, she says that she's no longer fighting for civil rights, but she's fighting for human rights. It is a moment where she sees that what's happening in Mississippi is not divorced from what's happening in the Congo, which she talks about actually in several of her speeches.
Yeah. No, Ella Baker and Malcolm X were also very much supporters of Fannie Lou, correct?
Correct. Malcolm X adored Fannie Lou Hamer, and the interesting thing is, she also adored him. And I chuckle about it because there's one moment where Fannie Lou Hamer is talking about Malcolm X as being, one of one of the most gifted and just inspirational people who she knows. And then when you ask Malcolm X, he's saying that actually Fannie Lou Hamer is one of the most gifted and inspirational, and similar to Ella Baker. Fannie Lou Hamer considered Ella Baker a friend, but also a mentor, someone she would go to for advice, someone who played a critical role in shaping her ideas about leadership in particular.
I was just wondering, as you just were talking, Keisha. Jonathan, what do you think the conversation might have been between Malcolm and Fannie Lou concerning religion, and perhaps his view that, well, listen, I love you, Fannie, but you're still in line with sort of the slave religion here. You know what I'm saying? Because you've written so much on this as well. What do you think?
Well, I think that if you follow the journey he was on, in his own growing into the depths of Islam, I suspect they could have found a meeting point. He used to say we need more light about each other. I see in my own reading of his life a moving toward an Islam that really embraces the radical fusion, that he witnessed at Mecca, and that's what she felt Christianity had revealed to her in the movement. So I know they admired each other quite a bit. I don't know how long they were able to consider together the differences between their faith tradition, but I do know from their own testimonies that much of what they found at the heart of it, they shared in common.
Great. I wanted to get into the issue, ideas of intersectionality, which you write about also. So how does race, gender, and class prejudice converge, in particular, to intensify the oppression of Black women?
Yes, and one of the things that I talk about in the book, which I thought it was so important to emphasize, is that we have to think of Fannie Lou Hamer as one of the foremothers of intersectionality. And I say that because we understand that intersectionality as a concept, the term itself was not in circulation until the 1980s, and we have to credit legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw for this. But what is interesting is if you look at Fannie Lou Hamer's speeches and the way that she spoke about women's rights, the way she spoke about liberation, she was always drawing connections. She was always grappling with the intersecting dimensions of race, of gender, and class in particular. And I think that's where we see intersectionality taking place, right? Even before there's a label for it. We see Fannie Lou Hamer standing in front of white feminists in the 60s and in the 70s too, telling them you can't only talk about women's rights if you're not going to address racism, if you're not going to address the way that people are experiencing oppression, also along the lines of class. So for her, you have to deal with the whole person, the whole experience. She spoke a lot about that, which connects deeply to her own experience, right? Because she would share stories of what it was like to work in the home, of a white, planter, and how she would talk about her interactions with white women in that context and the way that they would be part of the process of oppressing her. And she said, they didn't see me as a quote unquote sister. They treated me as lesser than, right? Because certainly because of her race, but also her status, right, as a working poor Black woman. So she wanted to make sure that even within the women's liberation movement, that there was always an attention to how all of these forces come together to oppress individuals. And we can take that perspective, I think, and even broaden it to today, because as I referenced in the book, Fannie Lou Hamer did not, for example, speak directly about sexuality, but that is absolutely part of this conversation, and thinking about how people are oppressed too, because of sexuality, also to an extent religion at times, but also ability. And in the book, I emphasize the fact that Fannie Lou Hamer was a disabled Black woman, though she didn't always talk about disability the way that we might talk about it today in today's context. That was very much an important part. of who she was, right, and her identity. And she wanted, as I said earlier, to always deal with the whole, the full experience of an individual.
Yeah. Wow. You know, I was just thinking, we should close our eyes and imagine William Barber and Fannie Lou on the same podium together, if we could. If God could do that for us for maybe a couple of hours, can you imagine what that might be like? And I know you also talk about these economic programs that she was involved with, rooted in self-sufficiency, or attempts to, the pig bank, the Freedom Farm Cooperative. But would she also be for, let's put it this way, a larger role for the government, federal government, a la FDR, a real New Deal, a real Great Society that really had teeth in it, that was really able to put this together in ways that the localities and the states couldn't. Do you think she would and go along with that? Because of course, Reverend Barber and Jonathan writes about this, and Liz, and
Right.
A lot. So where would she be on that, do you think?
Well, I think one of the things that I find so inspiring about her approach is oftentimes it was about not one or the other, but both and. So what's interesting is she did believe that it was important that the federal government did in fact play a significant role and to addressing the problem of poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And she spoke about the need, for federal policies that would help uplift people. And it's one of the reasons why she ran for political office, and one of the reasons why she wanted to become Senator Fannie Lou Hamer. She was unsuccessful, but she tried, because she said, if I have this opportunity to sit at the table, if you will, then I will be able to advocate for policies that will make a difference for the people of Mississippi, and for people in need across the nation. So she did believe in the importance of federal intervention, if you will, to tackle with the problem of economic inequality. At the same time, she would make an argument that we can't wait for federal intervention. So we may need it. We may call upon policymakers to do something, but we also have to come up with strategies on our own. So she called upon individuals to think creatively about what they could do within their communities. And what's interesting is Freedom Farm becomes, I think, a perfect model for how both come together, which is to say that she has this idea, but one of the reasons she's able to actually establish Freedom Farm is with funds, right, from the federal government. So it's not that she's saying, I don't need the federal government. It's just, she's saying, listen, I can do something, but she's able to match that the motivation, the individual motivation, with support, financial support, in order to buy the acres of land. I mean, so it is, and Jonathan mentioned earlier her collaboration with Head Start. So she ends up tapping into funds, federal funds, and using her own creativity and collaborating with people locally to make something happen. So it is a model that we might consider in today's context.
Yeah, I often think about this in the terms that Gandhi offered, where there's if you practice nonviolence, there's always the need to protest the violence of a system and to advocate for change. And Gandhi said at the same time, you have to have a constructive program. That's why he developed the ashrams and the experiments where you're trying to figure out how you want to live, even as you advocate for policies that make it easier to live. And I think that movements always have to have both of these. And she's certainly a shining example. It's really an attack on movement work it gives us this idea that, you know, asking for justice from the government is somehow asking the government to do for people. No, Fannie Lou Hamer is not asking the government to do for. She's asking for the government to make sure there's justice so that people can do for themselves.
Yeah, this is not charity. This is justice. This is human rights. I think that's a great. Was she involved in the welfare rights organization, the movement, also? Right? She was involved in that with Richard Cloward and Francis Piven back in the 60s. Keisha?
I don't think so. At least not formally.
Okay.
Right. And what's interesting, of course, one of the things that's so great about Fannie Lou Hamer was, and as I was trying to just chart her movements and her travels, so she would meet with so many different people, often, you know, be on stages with so many different people. And so I think that we can see how she was always open. Another thing that I love about her story, she certainly had her convictions, to be clear, and no one questioned where she stood on anything, because she would tell you. But if you were committed to equal rights and equal opportunity, she would collaborate with you, right? And so you had asked me earlier about internationalism. One of the things that's interesting is, as I was writing the book, I would find Fannie Lou Hamer's name on all kinds of petitions, or, you know, so someone would have an idea to boycott particular companies that were doing business in South Africa, and so they wanted to boycott in order to make a clear statement that they are not supporting apartheid. Fannie Lou Hamer would quickly sign on, right? And because for her, it matched, it connected deeply with her commitment to equal rights and opportunity for all. So even if she didn't collaborate with someone formally, she would absolutely collaborate with people whenever there were opportunities to do so informally.
Absolutely. This has gone so fast. Both of you are living proof of her dynamic life and ideas. Jonathan, would you like, in the minute or so we have left? I'm sorry, we just don't. Wish we had more.
All I'll say is it's wonderful to have this conversation. We need more conversations like this, which is why I'm so glad that Until I Am Free is out. I hope your viewers get a copy, and I hope when you read about what's happening here, you know you can be part of it today. You're certainly welcome to be part of the Poor People's Campaign. We hope to see you in Washington, D.C. on June 18th for the mass Poor People and Low-Wage Workers Assembly.
We'll be there, and Fannie Lou will be there too.
That's right.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we hope many in our audience will be there as well. We have run out of time. Thank you so very, very much, both of you. I had a million other questions. Hope to see you both again very, very soon. Thank you again so very, very much.
Many thanks to you both. Blessings.
And thank you so very, very much for watching us this week on The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Vrettos. We'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination.